In this movie, we will broaden our understanding of CSS by examining the standards associated with it and partially answer the question of, why should I care about CSS anyway? As you can see, I have already navigated to www.w3.org. W3.org is the website for the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C. The W3C maintains the standards of many things web-related, including HTML and CSS. The W3C is dedicated to creating these open standards for web technology. Now, of course, this is kind of the reason why we have come to the website. Not only do they maintain and develop these technologies, but they also keep great documentation and make it available for the world to see. So if you're looking for all the ins and outs of HTML or CSS, W3.org should be one of the first places you look. So let's take a look at some of these standards. If you take a look over here to the left, you will see the W3C A to Z, and it's giving you a definitive list of the different standards and technologies that the W3C oversees. Now, as you will notice, there's a lot of different web standards here, but there's some other web technologies that the W3C does not maintain, such as JavaScript. JavaScript is maintained by ECMA, so you do end up having some different organizations maintaining different web standards, but for the most part, the W3C does maintain some of the most common web standards out there. So if you scroll down a little bit here on this A to Z list, you'll see HTML. Now, CSS is dependent on HTML, so we do need to check out the standard associated with that. Now, I'm actually taking you here for something very specific, but as you can see, there's lots of good information available. Now, of course, maybe this is not a bestseller thriller, but it's definitely good stuff. Now, here you end up having a nice little blog area, but over to the right-hand side, you see what is HTML. It's publishing language of the World Wide Web, of course. And then you have the what. The what is actually referring to the different specifications of HTML, and as you can see, they're actually working on HTML5. HTML5 is not quite ready yet, but sometime in the future it will be. The current standards are going to be HTML4 and XHTML. Now, this kind of goes beyond the scope of this course, but I did want to go ahead and mention the difference between HTML and XHTML. And one of the reasons I'm mentioning it here is because on W3.org, they do give you all of this information. So if you just look around a little bit, you'll actually find it. So if I go into HTML 4.01, I'll end up seeing the specification and then the date related to it. If I scroll down, I'll end up seeing information related to this. And if I look and click on Introduction to HTML4, it will tell me all about HTML4. Then, if I click on what is HTML, it will end up giving me some information about that and then a nice brief history of HTML. So as you can see here, there's some great stuff inside of the W3 website. Now, one of the big differences between HTML and XHTML is that HTML is derived from SGML. Well, what in the world is SGML? SGML is another markup language that's used to create descendant markup languages. So HTML is a descendant of SGML. So the main difference between HTML and XHTML is that HTML is a descendant of SGML, while XHTML is descendant of XML. Now, XML is another type of markup language that allows us to essentially create our own markup languages, but it's a leaner version of SGML, and XML is future compliant and future compatible, so we're able to use it in a lot of different places. So in essence, this topic of the difference between HTML and XHTML is that XHTML is just a reformulation of HTML as an XML document type. Of course, there's more information about that, but that's the major difference. You can learn all about stuff like that just by poking around in here for free, and it's pretty awesome stuff. So just check it out. You're going to learn a lot of stuff by just going around here. Now, I also want to go ahead and scroll on down here to a couple of specific areas here that talk about our standard. Now, what affects us most here is the section about style sheets. Basically, it says style sheets simplify HTML markup and largely relieve HTML of the responsibilities of presentation. What this means is that you're going to be using style sheets to format your documents. Now, of course, this is the way that the standard specifies it, and that's why we want to care about CSS. Now, part of this section is dealing with the tendency of older technologies, such as HTML 3.2, to use HTML for presentation purposes. So what the specification is saying here is that we need to be using our style sheets more and more because the W3C will eventually phase out HTML's presentation elements. Now, even though the World Wide Web Consortium has marked these tags as being deprecated and preparing to delete them from the specification, many browsers are still going to use these legacy HTML codes, so you're still going to run into those things in the wild. Now, if I scroll on down a little bit more here, I'll see authoring documents with HTML4, and it talks about here with the 2.4.1 separate structure and presentation. So it discusses how we want to make our presentation elements and our structural elements completely separate. So that ties in to the idea of modularity. By keeping the structure separate from the appearance, it makes it easier to modify items in the future. Separation allows us to focus on changing one aspect without accidentally causing changes or damage to the other. Essentially, the HTML standard is saying, leave me alone with your style stuff. Go bug CSS and do it over there. So for our purposes, we've investigated the HTML standard enough to know that we're not going to be stylizing a whole lot of stuff with HTML. We need to do that with CSS.